So what is XPath? XPath is an XML path used to navigate through an HTML structure page. It's used whenever we are using Emu to web script. Each web page has an underlying HTML page, and that HTML page is made out of elements. Each one of these elements could be a button, text, whatever. Each one of those elements has specific attributes. XPath uses those attributes to pick that element. Basically, what XPath is doing is it's a path to an element on a page that Emu then uses to know where that element is. The way I think about it is, if you're familiar with the File Explorer, it's kind of like a path to a file in your File Explorer. There's different folders delimited by slashes, backward slashes or forward slashes, and each one of those is a different, for the technical people, node. So you can go from parent nodes to child nodes to a specific folder or file. There's also two types of paths. There's absolute paths and relative paths. This path here is an absolute path because it starts from the root or the first node, which is your C drive, and then it goes into following nodes to get to your final node. Relative path, which is what XPath uses, it's a little bit more specific. You can start from, instead of the beginning of the HTML document, you can start in the middle of the HTML document to specify a specific element. All right, HTML. Because we're using XPath in web scripting, it's probably good to know what HTML is. HTML is the standard language used to create web pages. It consists of elements. Each one of these elements has a tag name, content, and then a close tag name. The general structure of an HTML document is the document itself, which has a head and a body. The head has optional information about the web page, and the body is the meat and potatoes. That's where the main content is. All the elements that you'll be interacting with using Emu, that's where it will be located at. The general HTML element format is like this. You have an open tag, some content, and a close tag. Inside the opening tag are the attributes. As you can see, there's many attributes. There's class attributes, style attributes, ID, title, value, and the text. The attributes is what you'll be using to specify a certain element in the XPath. I think of it as the settings of the elements. Sometimes these attributes are specific to a specific element or unique to a specific element. Other times they might be used in multiple elements. Like for here, the ID of this button is my button. That is specific and unique to this button element. But for example, a class, there could be multiple buttons that all do the same thing. They would all have the same class. So if you're trying to specify a certain element, you probably don't want to use the class. You probably want to use the more unique attribute, which would be the ID. Here's kind of a more professional looking example of an element. There's a couple attributes, href, ID, on click. The stuff in the quotations is the value of that attribute. Then there's the content and the closing tag. This is kind of just a bare bones HTML document. As you can see, it's wrapped in an HTML document. There's the head, there's the body. This is the content. The content is made up of elements. XPath expressions. An XPath expression is the path itself to the element you are trying to get to. This is the general format of an XPath expression. It starts off with double slashes, which selects a current node. Then the tag name. So for example, if you were trying to select that button from before, the tag name would be button. Then this is what allows you to select attributes. If you were looking for that button, the ID attribute would be ID, and the value of that attribute would be my button. This is just kind of a simple format of an XPath. This format can change depending on if you're using functions inside here or if you're going off multiple attributes. Sometimes you'll see multiple nodes or tag names in here. So you'll see like dash dash div, dash div, dash div. It all depends on the structure of the HTML page. And the reason it changes so much is because HTML is not always uniform. It's really up to the developer of that web page. So whenever you're creating an XPath expression from HTML, there's a couple ways you can do it. In Emu, we have this tool called Command Builder, where you can inspect the element on the page, and it will give you the XPath itself. You can also use the browser's inspect tool, which I prefer. And basically what you're doing is you're looking to see where that element is in the HTML document. Once you find where the element is located, you're looking for unique attributes that you can use to pick that certain element. Then you can create an XPath expression using that unique element. There's this little XPath cheat sheet that is a good reference for anybody who is developing an XPath. It gives you different selectors, and then in it is this XPath test bed. So this XPath test bed is where you can practice your XPath. This is what, if you opened up your inspect tool, this is what you would see on the web page. This is the HTML, underlying HTML. So whenever you're making an XPath expression, there's two types. There's absolute path and relative path, like we mentioned before. The absolute path would start from the most upper node. So as you go from left to right, it's kind of hierarchical, and it goes from parent to child, as you can see here. So if I wanted the first parent, I could just say dash parent, and that would be the XPath for this first parent. That would get the entire web page. That's not very specific. So if we wanted to use a relative path to get the first pet, we could either do parent and then dash pet with an index of 1, or if we knew the pet's name, which is Tigger, then we could do an @ symbol to specify that we want to use the name. So we do name, and we would say equals the value we are looking for. So we're looking for Tigger, so we put Tigger in, etc. And then that would be the XPath for our pet Tigger. So it goes from parent, follows the indentations down to the first pet, and we can either use the first pet, which is a 1 as the index, or we can use the name Tigger. We could also, as a relative path, just look for a pet element named Tigger. We'll use the command builder later. So this means it's looking everywhere for a pet. So it'll look at all the pet elements, and it will find all the pet elements and then look for one specifically that says Tigger as the name. If you want to find the birthday, where the day equals 19, you would change the element to birthday, and then change this to day, which is the attribute name, equals 19. And then that would look for a birthday element that has a day value of 19. So in picking attributes, what you want to look for is unique, meaning it's specific to that element and no other element has that value. So for the pets, there's Tigger, Winnie the Pooh, and Pig. If you're looking for Tigger and only Tigger, you can use Tigger because there's only one Tigger. It's unique to that element. Static, meaning it doesn't change from session to session. Sometimes web pages will have IDs where the element itself will change from session to session, meaning you open the web page and the ID is a bunch of random numbers, but the next time you open the web page, that ID is a bunch of random letters. Because it switches from numbers to letters, you can't always assume that it will be the same set of random numbers and random letters. So that would not be a good element to go off of. But if you say you know that ID always starts with a certain number, then you could use a function that Colin will cover later to look for an element that starts with that certain number. But also sometimes it's a good thing to look for elements that change from session to session. So in the TRICARE script that Cassie recently did, she ran into this issue where she had to pick the name of a patient. That name would change from session to session based on which patient she was looking for. What she did was she used variables in the XPath itself to look for the name of that patient. So while the name would change itself, since she was looking for a specific name, she was able to find that element. So whenever you can't find a good attribute to go off of, it's good to use some common functions. These are the most common probably. Starts with, so you're looking for an ID that starts with U1. Contains, you're looking for a button that contains the substring sub. So if you were looking for a submit button, but it wasn't always submit, sometimes it was submit 1 or submit 2, but you still always wanted to click it, you could say, okay, just look for a button that has the title sub, and then it would choose that button. You can also use or and operators to look for multiple attributes that Colin he'll cover later. And then the text allows you to look for a button that has a specific text in it. If you know that there's a search button that you want to click, but you're not sure where it will be located on the page, you can say text equals search, and then it will go and find that button. A function is simply a snippet of code that performs a task. So it takes in an input, processes it, puts out an output. For XPath expressions in EMU, you're probably familiar with this string here. This is a general format of an identifier string. So whenever you see this browser equals and then whatever web page you're on, this is the web page name. This is telling EMU which .html document to look at. Sometimes there will be iframes, which is like if you picture a glass table and then a piece of paper underneath the glass table, where you can see the piece of paper underneath the glass table, but whenever you try to touch the text on the piece of paper, you can't touch it because it's on a different plane. That iframe is kind of a similar concept. Colin will be covering that more in depth. Then over here, you have the XPath expression itself. So the XPath expression is just a small part of the overall emu identifier string. This is what tells emu which element in the HTML document it should be interacting with.